foothills of Sicily, far away from the modern American scene. In the 80s, my uncle was one of the first victims to a classic diss track. This diss track was called Rigola, which in Sicilian translates to crumb. What happened is that the bandmates of my uncle's band took a Coca-Cola bottle out of his room. It was a 1980s era Olympic-themed Coca-Cola bottle. They took it and they drank it. And in true Italian fashion, my uncle made his anger to this offense abundantly known. And believing that he had way overblown this situation, they made this diss track and called his feelings just a crumb. Just a little riso. My father, as he tells me the story, he sighs and he laughs. Your uncle is a bit of a pack rat. Not literally a mouse, but rather someone that collects things and holds on to them, things that to others seem a little bit more meaningless. He says, maybe in a way, I am one too. My uncle and my father are in a very unique place. Not quite Generation 1 Italian Americans, but not quite Generation 2. Sort of a Generation 1.5. My family's not only Italian, but Sicilian. Sicily is the small Italy off of mainland. It's a small island off of mainland Italy. If you think of Italy as that boot-shaped kind of like peninsula, Sicily's a little rock right off of it. My grandparents were born in the farmlands of Sicily, raised to be hardworking farm hands, which is really fascinating how they're able to sew their own clothes, but there are generations of my family who have lived and died by tilled fields rather than the modern education system we know today. By age 12, both of my grandparents were pulled out of school in order to help out on the farm full-time. This is truly a testament to La Compagna, this idea of almost desperation and seclusion from the modern world, the way that you're taken out of school in order to be working in the farms. However, with the birth of my uncle and my father, this long idea seemed to change. My grandmother, in her small town of Sicily, was the first woman to wear pants, drive a car, and shoot a gun. So, moving to America, there was a bit more promise than just women wearing pants. There was a promise of immigrants making a real life for themselves, rather than living in this small town where people don't really seem to go anywhere. With not much knowledge of English and not much money to be betting on the American dream, the birth of my father and his brother solidified this idea of prosperity that was promised in the new land that was the United States. However, still in the hills of Italy lay a responsibility, my aging grandparents. And this war between opportunity in the United States and the responsibility of allegiance to their home ended in a final winner. When my dad was in middle school, his family packed up their bags and they moved back to Sicily. But his generation would be the last one that the farmlands, or La Compagna, would take with him. If I look into the past, I try to think of where La Compagna began. Who exactly was the first generation to start on the farmland before eventually my father left? After around 5 generations of people, including my own, 40 or 50 cousins, and around a dozen aunts or uncles, it seems as if La Compagna is as persistent and memory as time itself. But Generation 1.5 was the last child to be taken. And eventually, my father moved back to the States to have me and my siblings. Now, if we try to think about the disparity on my life and my grandmother's, it's more than just me being able to wear pants. I go to college here in Saratoga Springs. Over the summer, I don't only wear pants, I wear bikinis and I tan in the sun. That's an idea that my grandmother at my age wouldn't even think about. But this disparity is a little bit more than just suburbs versus farmlands. Education in college rather than education when trade schools are on the farmlands. It's something deeper, something different. Something that I have identified as this idea of scarcity. What is scarcity? Scarcity is a lack of resources, a lack of food to eat, a lack of medicine when you're sick, and potentially a lack of money to cover the cost of living. My family has spent generations fighting against scarcity. My grandmother was the second Antonia Lombardo in my family. She had a younger sister, and also named Antonia, who had died due to a lack of medicine before her. So we have all of these generations fighting, and all these generations' intrinsic need to provide. It's very serious and honestly dependent on their survival. To provide food and money and resources is the heart of my family. And now my dad provides for me and for my siblings. But his provision is different. When it was his turn to provide in the family, he did not leave learning. He continued to learn along with providing. In high school, he would work in the family's polaria, which is the Italian version of like rotisseries. And in college, in between classes, he'd do roofing with my grandfather. So he has worked just as hard as all of the Lombardos before him, but with something specifically different: his pursuit of education despite that. And after many years of working and roofing, and not just 4 years, but 8 years of undergraduate college, my dad was eventually enrolled in med school and became a doctor. When scarcity ends, something changes. And when my dad became a doctor, that end and that change arrived. He was one of the first Lombardos with a college degree. And I think the very first Lombardo with a medical degree. With this medical degree, there are no more fields to be tilled. There are no clothes that need to be hand-sewed. I get my food from the grocery store down the street. I don't dig it out of the ground. And so that change is drastic, extreme. My grandmother is still very much alive and well, and even she hasn't seen a life that I have until more recently. But with the money from an empty salary still comes with this mindset of scarcity and the need to provide that persists. And that need to provide kind of prevents us from letting go of the physical and material things that we surround ourselves with. And this idea of scarcity and how that influenced how my family behaves kind of occurred to me over spring break. I was helping bring some boxes down to my basement with my mom. And I realized there's a lot of things down there that we don't touch. All of these books from when my father did medical school, just kind of sitting in our basement collecting books that he once spent hours toiling over to become the important and successful man that he is today, but now they kind of sit in their basement untouched. And not to be used by me, who might pursue a degree in healthcare, as this science is now outdated. It's almost to me as if these things in our basement sit there, not because the items of themselves are of value, but rather because of the time and energy and effort put into making the money or to purchase said things is more important. Kind of like a signifier to how far my family has come and how much they had suffered in the past. So I decided to kind of present this idea at dinner one time. I asked my family, like, hey, there's a lot of stuff in our basement. Why do you think we hold on to these things? What do you think we can do with them? And as I had this conversation, I felt myself getting extremely overwhelmed. Or went to the point that I was not at all expecting. I kind of had to stop what I was saying and sit down for a sec. I realized that in understanding the how and why my father does things, I began to understand myself and realize what a grip that to provide, the idea to provide and provision had over me. My roommate can attest to this. The way that scarcity presents to me is that during, when I have to do my laundry, I am very specific with it. I have to strategize how I do my laundry, the size of the load, what kind of clothes are in said load to make sure that every single drop of water and every single ounce of soap that goes into washing my clothes is maximized to their full extent. There is no reason for me to do this. I have not lived through the scarcity the rest of my family has lived through to sort of have this intrinsic behavior kind of that grew up with me. I have not lived through this experience, and yet I act as if I do. I'm devoutly subscribed to this idea that at one point everything will take away from me, just as it may have to my family in the past. I am afraid of these monsters, which are cast by the shadows of my family and their experience. One that I'm very much not someone who's experienced myself. So, what to do now? I think of a quote that a family friend told me one time. It ran in my family until it ran into me. I want to have an open dialogue about the how and whys of this behavior, about where they come from, and how exactly to unpack them. But this isn't as cliche and graceful as I'm making it seem. It's conversations that are not super easy, as shown by my kind of stuttering and awkwardness at that family dinner. And that family dinner is a safe space. It's baby steps, and baby steps that I am very thankful to take with the wonderful friends and family around me. I realize that this is an issue that is outside of me, so after kind of stumbling across this idea of scarcity and how it presented in my immigrant family, I looked to the internet for other sources and another perspective. And there's very limited scholarly, peer-reviewed research papers out there that talk about hoarding and the house of whys. There's more just statistics about the demographics it presents it. So, being the biology major that I am, I decided to do a little informal research of my own. I talked to friends of all sorts of backgrounds. Friends from the Dominican Republic, friends with family from Korea, friends who are Cypriot, friends who are Turkish, friends who are Cuban. I called up my friend who has family who's currently living in Pakistan. And all of these friends, all of these people seem to kind of resonate with what I had to say. And in these conversations I had with them, they helped me form the ideas that now turn into the speech that I'm having today with you guys. So, I'm incredibly grateful for the support that my friends have given me, and incredibly grateful for the providing that my father has blessed me with. I thank my dad, and I honor him a lot. I really acknowledge the work that he put into overcoming the scarcity that he grew up with. Just the amount of effort, decades of effort he put into seeking a life that was beyond his own. And even though I've picked up maybe a bad habit or two in terms of scarcity that he's experienced with, I realize now that the provision that I choose to do, the actions that I choose to do in order to maximize the resources I have, I choose to do so. Because my father has inspired me to do so. He has inspired me to provide, to strive, to make something better of myself based on the opportunities and the privilege that I have. So this is a really big thanks to him. And it's also a big thanks to you guys who choose to be here, who choose to listen, and to maybe apply this perspective to your friends and to family that you may have who may be immigrants and exhibit interesting quirky behaviors. Because those quirky behaviors of like, God, he holds on to those old medical textbooks we might need, sometimes can stem to a larger and honestly inspiring idea that is really